Greetings. So today I am doing a video on what I would like to see for future civs for Age of Empires 4. Yeah, I know, not a big topic, but it's something because not too much interesting happened other than the recent patch where they nerfed the ballista slash spring holds, whatever, which is a decent thing since they were kind of ruling the competitive scene, but I'm not a competitive player, so it's not too much of a concern for me. If you're more competitive, then maybe you'd be more interested, but that's not what this channel is. This channel is just kind of a dumping ground for my thoughts on things, I guess. But anyways, at present, Age of Empires 4 only has 8 civilizations, much like how 3 started out and then they eventually started adding civs. And it's not that bad because the civs they've had added are pretty interesting overall. I like playing as most of them, or playing with most of them, and the ones I don't, I think other people like. Funny enough, the civs I don't care to play as tend to be the ones that are actually pretty good from what I hear. But yeah, that's another thing. But as for what could be done, well, there's a lot of room they can play with. I mean, thus far, they have at least a few continents that they don't have anything for, like Africa, the Americas, and Australia. Although I don't know if there would have been anything in the medieval period from Australia relevant enough to include, but that's neither here nor there. So I guess the first and probably obvious one, because I mentioned it a decent amount when I made my first video with the Age of Empires 4 review, is a Byzantine Empire civ. They existed for about 1,000 years, and in that time, even when they weren't at their peak, they were still something that the other powers kept in mind. So it's not like they're unrelevant enough to include. And you could have a civilization that's probably geared more towards missile cavalry and Greek fire. And you could have flamethrowers, since I think that's something that the Byzantine Empire played with. And honestly, the Byzantine Empire is probably one of the most obvious you can include because, yeah, it was there even in the time period that this game seems to be geared around, with around the Norman period. The Byzantine Empire was still relatively relevant. Maybe not the most relevant, but it still has a place in time. And another civilization that I think is probably obvious that they're going to eventually throw in, just due to the what I've seen in the first campaign, is a Danish Sieve. And that's just because they already seem to have units and a flag ready and to go. So I do suspect a Danish Sieve, which will probably focus more on axes and other things, will probably be included. Whether it would be called a Viking Civ or just a Denmark or Sweden, I don't know. Well, probably not Sweden. I don't think Sweden was a thing at this time period. More than happy to be proven wrong, but I doubt there would be a Sweden Civ in a medieval game. And while we're pretty much focusing on Europe for the time being, I guess an obvious thing would be having a Spanish Civ. Whether it would be Castile or both Castile and Aragon, I don't know. Uh, Probably wouldn't be just plain Spain, because Spain wasn't united for a pretty long time, and I guess if you would do a Spain, you'd also do a Umamed emirate or something, just so you can cover everything in the Iberian Peninsula, along with maybe Portugal. I'm also thinking what would work for campaigns, because 4 campaigns exist for the English, French, Mongols, and the Rus, but I'm thinking since not every civ got a campaign, that not every civ that would be added would have a campaign. Another thing, like with a Castile and stuff, you'd probably want conquistadors with, like, maybe gunpowder cavalry. I don't know, I'm kind of just spitballing ideas. It's not like I know enough about, like, what the general army makeup of these old medieval civilizations were. But I'm more just going off of what would make sense to play as and what I would like to play as. Somewhat going off by previous, like, Age of Empires 2, which civs were fun. Like, the Spanish was a fun civ in that game. All in all, I like the conquistadors. So that's kind of where my mindset goes. And on the topic of Spain, I guess that does bring into the question of, would the Aztecs and Mayans and Incas get in? And personally, I wouldn't dislike it. However, I am of the thought of, would they have been, like, if you wanted to keep it in the general time period that they seem to want to set up for it, I don't know if the Aztecs would have actually been around for the period of time. Not doing to it being separate, but because before Columbus, I don't know where all the civs were, or nations were. I don't know if the Aztecs existed at the same time as, say, the Norman invasion. If anyone would know better, please tell me. I'm actually genuinely curious. But, like, it's not a case of they shouldn't be in the game. It's a case of I don't know if the Mayans... Well, maybe the Mayans, but the Aztecs and the Incas wouldn't get in. And at that point, I don't know if it would be interesting. Now, that it does also beg the question, though, if they would actually play around with the time period, but due to the fact that they've put more of a focus on history in these games, I don't know what Native American civilizations would get in. And it's not that I don't want them, I just don't know realistically what could get in as of what they've set up. Now, while I don't know if anything from the Americas could be added, one continent that can be added from is probably Africa. An obvious one for that would be Ethiopia. I don't know much what you could do with Ethiopia at this time period, but that could be added. Along with whatever the Egypt name around this time period would be. I think the Fatimids, or I don't know if the Abbasid actually owned Egypt at this time, but that would be one. The Moors would probably be the most obvious for a North African civ if Egypt isn't on the table. Because, well, I do recall from Medieval 2 Total War that the Moors was a civilization that owned both land in, well, Europe and Africa, but then again, I don't know how on the money with history Medieval 2 was, so maybe that's not the most accurate to go by. I guess Asia will probably have the bulk of most of the other civs that they could add into it, with an obvious one being Japan, considering they repelled the Mongols and have samurai and were decently relevant. Although I imagine they would probably be centered on one of the first periods of civil war before the Shingeku area. I hope I pronounced that right. It would probably be civs surrounded on samurai and stuff, although maybe it could be centered on something else, I don't know. Along with that, Korea would be nice with probably more of a naval civ, because one of the things I noticed is while they have civs that do better on the seas, they don't really have a civ that's kind of geared to a navy. Because, like, they're still stuck with the same 3 ships or 4 ships that they usually have. Like, it's kind of been consistent, except for 3, where the non-Europe civs kind of got to have a little fun with their navy. But other than that, I guess a Vietnam or another India civ would work, but I don't know what other civilizations they could throw in. I don't think there'd be anything that relevant in the Australia continent to add, so I doubt there'd be anything from there. There might also be, because I don't know much about this time period for Australia, that I don't know what would be added. But, yeah. This has kind of been a low-key, but I didn't know of anything else very interesting happening that I would want to talk about. So, yeah. Other than that, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and please have a nice evening or day or whenever you watch it. Social media and stuff will be in the description.